Okay, now here we are again at another podcast, another episode of Compliance in Motion. Thanks so much for dialing in today. Listeners, you're in for a treat. Today we have our guest, Jeff Cianciola, Chief Executive Officer of AccuPoint Software Development, and he's going to talk to us about his expertise and his journey throughout the industry that he focuses in on in manufacturing and compliance in the process industries, and the whole challenges that folks have and how AccuPoint really helps them to tackle with their software and stay current with compliance and safety concerns. My name's Tony DeAscentis, and I'm your podcast host, and Jeff Cianciola is here as our guest. Hi, Jeff. How you doing today?
Good, Tony. How are you today?
I'm doing great. We got a beautiful sunny day here in Northeast Ohio as we head into the fall season and the winter months, unfortunately, but we'll take every day that we can. So let's get this thing started here today. As we talk about background in your journey, Jeff, can you tell us a little bit about your professional journey? What led you to being the founder of AccuPoint Software? And then after we get into that, we'll talk a little bit about the mission of your company, the verticals that you focus in on, things like that.
Sure, absolutely. So my background is originally in manufacturing, and I was involved with compliance and quality management and the like at a number of firms. And during that time, we were investigating the use of certain software programs to help us kind of streamline that process, and really didn't find anything that really hit the mark. And so, um, kind of in my off time, I started developing a platform, which is the impetus for AccuPoint Software. And we've been doing that for about 15, 16 years now. So.
Yeah. So that pivotal experience was really what we hear so much of in the industry around innovation is there's somebody who's performing a task, who's part of an organization and is looking for a solution and hasn't been able to find one. So they're smart enough to just create it themselves. And in your case, that became AccuPoint. So tell us a little bit about it. You know, for those who aren't familiar, the mission and the primary services that AccuPoint brings to the table for its target customer base.
Sure, absolutely. So AccuPoint Software is a provider of compliance management solutions. We primarily work in the oil and gas sector. So we work with organizations, manufacturing organizations, what we call service supply organizations, E&P, exploration and production organizations. And so this particular industry obviously is very high risk and has a lot of compliance requirements around that. And so our company offers solutions, not only ISO-based solutions, ISO 9000, 14,000, 45,001, but also specific oil and gas industry requirements. So like API specification Q1, API specification Q2, 6A, and the like. And so these resources or these requirements require a tremendous amount of resources from the organization. So a lot of times what we find is that their customers will require these certifications, and so the organizations will achieve certification, but it takes an awful lot of resources, not only in terms of time and money, but also human resources to maintain these certifications. And so what AccuPoint does is provide a framework that allows them to kind of streamline the management and reporting requirements of those standards.
So basically, what they're doing is they're having people go and take the certifications and making sure they align with the standards, and then they're loading the completed results into your software, or is it all integrated in together? How does the what are the mechanics of how it works?
Sure, absolutely. So that's a great question. So typically, when these organizations, our clients, are trying to acquire new business, uh, their ultimate customer would have requirements that they need to meet. And so typically those are some type of third party certification. And so this is a kind of a long and drawn out process. An organization needs to kind of get their program in place. Um, and they need about 6 months worth of data prior to having a third party auditor come in and do what they call a pre assessment.
Oh,
And then subsequent to that, they would have an initial assessment and then continuing assessments depending upon the size and scope of their organization. And so a lot of companies will, maintain records like corrective actions or management reviews or internal audits or um, safety incidents and the like. They may be doing it manually. They may be doing it with an Excel spreadsheet. And when it comes time for these third-party audits, when an auditor actually comes in and evaluates the management system, it takes a lot of time and effort to kind of pull all that information together. And so what AccuPoint provides is kind of a framework or a siloed approach where they can access users can access and enter data or retrieve data as needed. Hope that answers
I
the
see.
question.
Interesting. Yeah, absolutely. So I would imagine that if I was one of your prospective customers out there, I'd be looking at these compliance challenges. And perhaps I'm a bit old school. I've got Excel workbooks, I've got 3D ring binders, I've got emails, I've got all these disparate parts that I'm tracking. This is often a lot of times what we find when we're working with people to just get their safety and equipment inspections kind of in place, and they're looking at like the Ving platform as their organization tool so that if OSHA came in knocking or something like that. Is it similar to that respect? But in your offering really is helping people build towards the goal of achieving these certifications and then maintaining them. Is that correct?
A lot of our clients, similar to what you're saying, are using manual systems, three-ring binders, Excel spreadsheets, etc. Um, some organizations will have some rudimentary software programs in place, or in a lot of cases, some kind of legacy systems that were built long ago that maybe don't address current challenges. So that's where we kind of come in. But yes, absolutely right.
So when you're talking to somebody out there and they're describing these challenges, I get the organization of data and being able to track it. What are maybe one or two other common challenges that you hear around gearing up for this type of certifications and maintaining the data and the compliance along that path? I would imagine the people component in alignment to get everybody into the right process has got to be an enormous challenge for compliance in this area.
So yeah, I think I think that there's a couple of different challenges that an organization may face. Obviously, there is resistance within their workforce. They're used to doing it a certain way, maybe are comfortable with current systems, and so there's some resistance there. The other item I guess that I would say is probably a lot of organizations are kind of risk adverse and are hesitant to make a change, even though it might be for the better. And so a lot of times there's an educational component with it where we explain how this kind of simplifies their lives and allows them really to focus on those day-to-day responsibilities that are their um, uh, core focus.
But at the same time, you're trying to educate people on these key areas that you just mentioned. But is there also an education path where you're really trying to help them to be more proactive versus reactive with their compliance management?
So a lot of times, so certification to these standards is really going to kind of drive that. So if in fact they are um, have a certified system and are being audited on a regular basis, they really need to make sure that they have all their I's dotted and T's crossed, which is really where AccuPoint comes in and kind of streamlines that whole process. But when we're talking about a certified management system, we're really looking at the entirety of the organization from C-level on down, and how they are how they are conducting their processes, how they're recording those processes. We get into calibration, we get into assets, we get into training and competency of the personnel. So it's pretty wide ranging, and so um, uh, typically, most organizations that have embarked on this path of certification kind of understand the requirements, and what is needed, and kind of what they need to do in order to effectively achieve and maintain that certification.
So I would imagine there's an aspect or this challenge. Okay, so you've got the AccuPoint software running, you've got your goals on which certifications that your organization needs to achieve for winning certain business or maintaining certain contracts that they have. Is it a matter, like, are we collecting a lot of data from workers in the field and they're required to, uh, like, capture data and place it into AccuPoint? Or is it more processes are getting defined within AccuPoint and people are referencing those processes on, "Oh, here are the 10 things I need to be proving that I did."
So to answer your question, both. So kind of the process starts really planning those processes and understanding and having work instructions and standard operating procedures and the like. But during that process, there will be a tremendous amount of data entry, whether that be inspection or corrective actions or nonconformities, or the like. So a little of both, really.
Yep. So maybe give us a little bit of an example of a customer that you worked with and, what your starting point is. So, you know, they've got all this stuff going on. What's the first thing that you do with them to assess where you start on them on their journey to compliance?
So typically, an organization will reach out to us, kind of prior to reaching out to us, they've made a decision that they, in fact, are going to move towards certification. They probably at some point contacted or have set up with a third party auditor, or in some cases, a consultant, to help them implement this across their organization. And so, what we provide is a technical solution for them to store, manage, and retrieve all of this information. And so, they'll reach out to us, and we typically will run a demo where we'll understand pain points that they have, maybe understand current systems that they're using, understand ultimately what their goals are. And then we will provide a solution for them. And typically, we can implement that solution, or deploy, as we call it, relatively quickly. And then with the onboarding process, we're actually working with them um, to explain features and functionality of the platform, but also helping them get their kind of legacy data involved, so that our goal here is that um, as we get further and further into the training, their people are actually seeing their data so they can understand the interactions between the modules. So, just to give you an idea, um, you know, one typical deployment might have 56 to 60 different integrated modules. Um, And so what we mean by that is they may be putting a corrective action or a nonconformity into the system and then generating out a corrective action or a return material authorization or something along those lines. And all of those
Mm,
records are kind of linked together so that during an audit or during a management review, they can kind of follow that a daisy chain through the process. Hopefully that
got
makes
you. So
sense.
that's a real, yeah, it really does. So it also helps our listeners to understand what part of the business that you focus in on. In my mind, I was kind of thinking that there was a consultative role that you played before they needed a software application implemented. But I think correct me if I'm wrong now, I think what I'm hearing you say is that typically where you come in is when they need the tool, the kit to really manage and track and report on the entire process. Is that right?
Yeah, I think that's fair. We occasionally will do some low level consulting. So if an organization is just new to the whole process, we may provide some consulting or some insight into things. But, we primarily focus our efforts on the solution and helping them, training them, and helping them understand how it works and what they need to do.
Right. Now, we've talked a lot about compliance alignment to reach the certain certifications. Does the certification intersect with a safety training thread, or is it more about um, checking all the right boxes and doing all the right things and showing that you can sustain all the right data collection around process? Is there a component or time where it intersects with on the job safety?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's probably true of any organization, any industry. So, uh, a lot of these ISO and API standards that we've been talking about have a very deep risk management component to that. And obviously, when you're talking about risk management, either from a process standpoint, obviously safety is going to be involved in that. So injuries, permitting, regulations, etc. So, yeah, it absolutely runs very deep.
Interesting. So, what type of for your, kind of like most, I guess, the customer that you would work with the most, what types of safety concerns are they typically dealing with? And what types of remediation or path does your software help them, kind of take? Is it actually serving up the training, or is it actually the one it's saying that you need to do these trainings and account for the research for them?
I guess the we would not be doing the training. We would not be serving up the training for them. What we would be doing is managing their training and competency program. So they have X number of employees, and depending upon their job responsibilities, they need to be competent or they need to be trained on certain things. As you're aware, certainly from an OSHA standpoint, we have, fork truck licensing and, maybe fire extinguisher use and all these other types of things. So we wouldn't actually provide that training. Typically, they either have that in house or they're using a third party platform such as yourself for that.
Hmm.
But we would then record when those people completed that training, and if there's an expiration date on it, the system would alert them that they need to redo the training or be recertified. So yeah, we're not really providing them resources from a training standpoint around safety issues, but we do kind of manage that training and competency, uh, those matrices as we call them, for them to be able to
Right.
report to their auditor or internally.
So as part of all of these regulations, obviously we touched on safety just now, and there's regulations for different types of jobs, and this all ties back to OSHA. But it sounds like a super complex environment where you have all these industry standards. You've got the ISO standards, the OSHA standards, the regulatory frameworks that you have to pay attention to and that you have to track. So, do you find that most companies out there, this is a big point, I mean, that they would struggle with, and understanding the regulations? Is it more on their challenges and complexities of understanding the regulations or more on the documenting and proving that they're compliance as their bigger challenge?
I think it's probably equally both. Initially they need to understand what those requirements are. They need to understand how they implement them in their organization, how they document them, etc. But, subsequent to that, and once they achieve that certification, they absolutely need to monitor that and record that and be able to prove that their system is meeting those requirements.
Right. So it's kind of a 50-50. There's complicated regulations that I need to be on, but then I have to have this scenario where it's complicated to keep track of them. And so the understanding and the tracking and everything needs to be up to snuff across the board. Now, is it different for smaller companies than larger companies, or does it not matter the size of your organization?
I think there's probably different challenges based upon the size of an organization. So, if you've got a 50 or 100 employee company, and you're running one shift or maybe two shifts, that's a whole lot easier to manage than if you're a large multinational with tens of thousands of employees operating geographically in diverse locations. So, the meeting the requirements does not change or
That's, yeah.
with the size of the organization, but um, you know,
Yeah.
b- being able to manage that across an organization, depending upon size, would be a challenge.
So it really doesn't matter if you're a smaller organization or a larger organization. If your goal is to become compliant in a particular area that you help people stay focused in on, the rules are the same. You have to arrive at those and check all the right boxes for the task at hand and the job at hand. But certainly the complexities when become even more than tenfold, depending upon the size, the locations, and the part. So, where are these companies located? Are these land-based companies, sea-based companies? Tell us a little bit about their environment.
So, in terms of our client base, we deal with a number of different organizations. So, just to kind of step back a little bit, in the oil and gas industry, there are m- companies, manufacturers who make equipment for the oil field, pipe, valves, those types of things. And then there are what we call service supply organizations, which are actually providing the services, maybe drilling or cementing or whatever the case may be. And so we have clients that are land based, we have clients that are offshore. It kind of really runs the gamut. But um, I just to kind of step back to the previous question, everybody is required uh, the to meet the requirements of the standard, regardless of their size, regardless of their location. Now, there is some flexibility in terms of how they do it based upon their operations and what their processes are. And that's where the auditor comes in and kind of verifies that stuff. So I expanded on that a little bit more than your question, but
Yeah,
hopefully that provides a
no,
little
that's
bit of
great. So there's consistency. Doesn't matter on the size of the organization. It's really mostly focused on the task at hand and what their business is, and does it, and that they have to meet the requirements of those regulations. So we have these regulations in place and we can see the target ahead. And in most cases, I would imagine this is not a flip of the light switch. This is something where it takes time to achieve the infrastructure implementation as well as sustaining processes that employees can, adequately follow to ensure the compliance. But things go on. The world changes, regulations change. How dynamic are any of these regulations? So, like, if I'm on the way to being certified in a particular area, is it possible that there's regulatory changes on this journey that I have to be able to account for?
So certainly, absolutely, that potentially will happen, and in fact, we have updates to these standards. So for ISO 9001, for example, we're at 2015. API Q1, which is a uh, quality system for manufacturers that need monograms in API, we're at the 10th edition, and so previously it was the ninth edition. One of the things that you know I guess we want to clarify is there are requirements and then there's regulations. So certification might be required, but then an organization also needs to meet any applicable local or national regulations related to a particular process as well.
Right. And I would imagine that the AccuPoint software is able to adapt to any of these scenarios because you have the capabilities to capture the data. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, and in fact, one of the services that we provide for our clients is a standards update. So when these standards are updated, not only will we modify the framework to make sure that it meets those new um, functions, but also we'll alert our clients so they can make changes.
Mhm.
um, you know, Obviously there's certain components of this that are external to a software program that they need to be able to put in place and communicate with their employees. So
So it's clear that AccuPoint is directly aligned with helping people before, during, and after their journey to get to the regulation points and maintain those regulation points, as well as when they're looking ahead to changes in the industry. Now, you've been doing this for a while. What kind of major changes have you seen impact some of your customers?
oh I mean there are many. But I think
What's your favorite?
you uh well, I mean, I think, for the most part, the standards, so organizations that are certified to certain standards understand what those standards are, and they will, from, I guess what I'm trying to say is, from a standards standpoint, I think that's relatively easy. Where we get into problems are, um, how COVID impacted operations, or how
Yeah.
potentially these new tariffs are going to impact operations. And so, we were just having a conversation not that long ago where no one knows exactly what's going to happen with these tariffs, but potentially that may require that we go out and find new suppliers, or additional suppliers, to make sure that we have the product that we need to perform operations. And so what we're seeing is discussions around, hey, do we need to bring in, for example, the quality management or the engineering, or the purchasing department earlier in the process, so that we can make sure that uh, there are no disruptions to our operations. So, I think just day to day business realities are probably the biggest challenge for any organization. I know it's true for us. I'm sure it's probably true for you. So,
Yeah, absolutely. And our customers, that's really why we're here, both you and I, with the technologies that we offer up to our different verticals, is to help them be able to streamline, automate, track, disseminate information into the field to their employees so they can focus on all these extraneous variables that are kind of coming onto their business that they have to react to and plan for ahead. So if you were
Yeah.
looking ahead and as we wrap up here today a little bit, and you're thinking about giving some advice to that safety and compliance manager who's starting out on this journey. Maybe they are just working with an organization that's just made a strategic decision to align with one of these areas of certification and ensure that they have compliance. What piece of advice would you give them as a first step? Start here.
Well, I think probably, I guess from my standpoint, I would say, you know, take time to understand where you are in the process. A lot of times, what happens or what we have seen is that organizations, maybe someone in the C level or maybe a customer is saying, hey, we need this certification. And so everybody gets all jazzed up about it and they go out, but they don't really understand the ramifications or the amount of time, effort, money, resources that it's going to require to actually do it right. And so,
Mm.
you know, and in some cases that leads ultimately to failure, or they don't realize a return on their investment. And so I think you truly need to understand what you're getting yourself into, and what that entails, and really where you are in that process. Do you have documented processes, procedures, work instructions, etc.? Do you have an organization that can support um, these requirements moving forward? So that's kind of, I guess, my best advice.
I think that's great advice for our listeners out there today. So many times we just like will take our own internal process. Well, it's there, it's set up, it is what it is. And we immediately are looking out. We know what our pain points are, we know what our challenges are. However, if you haven't done some type of readiness assessment, how much of what you currently have is reusable and ready to go, right? How much of what you
Right.
currently has it set the right foundation? And what is the size of that gap? Because, it doesn't matter if you're a small company or you're a large company, somebody has established your budget and you've got to make it work. So, understanding what your point of readiness is and your starting point and what that gap is as to where you head is going to help you be in a position of empowerment to talk to leadership and say, look, we're here, but we need to end up here. Here's how much work needs to be done and here's what the experts are saying about what kind of budget to establish to get us there. And that seems to me like oftentimes that assessment of where we're at today is very casual. It's the top of the list of things that have been bugging you or that are wrong or your gaps would have been issues, but it's a more holistic view that you might need to take before taking your first step on the journey to certification. And without a doubt, having the right tool like AccuPoint to help you organize, track, report, and sustain these new processes is absolutely critical as you look towards your journey ahead. So, Jeff, I want to thank you so much for joining us today. Our podcast guest, Jeff Cianciola, CEO of AccuPoint, with plenty of insights and experiences around reaching these very complex certifications and sustaining them over time. And we hope you listeners today at least were able to grab on to 2 or 3 key points that you can tuck away and create a new action item, a new task on your list, and start on your journey tomorrow. So, if you found today's session helpful, please subscribe so you don't miss a future podcast, share, and like. Thank you so much. And Jeff, thank you again. Have a great day.
Thank you, Tony. I appreciate it. It was a great time.